The cardboard box smelled of dust and forgotten time. Arjun slit the packing tape with a key, the sound a sharp rip in the quiet of his one-bedroom apartment. Inside, nestled in a bed of yellowing foam peanuts, was his latest, and most desperate, gamble. A lot of vintage analog equipment from an online auction site, listed by an estate liquidator with a 0 feedback score. The price had been so low it felt like a typo, a glitch in the digital marketplace that he, a struggling videographer, had been quick to exploit. He pulled out the items one by one. A heavy Panasonic SVHS deck, its buttons worn smooth by countless presses. A JVC camcorder from the late 90s, bulky and imposing. And finally, a smaller, unassuming cardboard box, its contents rattling ominously. He opened it to find a stack of VHS tapes, maybe 24 of them, all devoid of labels. No dates, no titles, just blank black plastic spines staring back at him like dead eyes. "Jackpot," he muttered to the empty room, a tired smile touching his lips. In a world obsessed with 4K and HDR, there was a niche but passionate market for the warm, gritty aesthetic of analog video. He could clean this gear up, sell it to collectors or nostalgic filmmakers, and maybe, just maybe, make his rent this month without having to edit another interminable corporate training video. The digitization process began that evening. It was tedious work. He hooked the VCR to his computer via capture card, the cables a tangled serpent on his desk. The first few tapes were exactly what he expected, hours of static snow, interrupted by fragments of old soap operas and news broadcasts, the ghosts of television past. He let them run, the hiss and flicker a monotonous backdrop as he scrolled through job listings on his phone. Hope began to curdle into disappointment. This wasn't a jackpot, it was junk. It was well past midnight when he slotted in the final tape. The label was as blank as the others. He hit play on the VCR and minimized the capture window, ready to ignore another hour of nonsense. But something made him double-click the window, maximizing it on his screen. It wasn't static. It was a room. The footage was grainy, bathed in the sickly greenish hue of a night vision camera, though there seemed to be a dim, ambient light source. The camera angle was fixed, as if placed on a shelf or a tripod, pointing diagonally across a sparse, rectangular space. It was utterly mundane. Faded floral wallpaper, a scuffed wooden floor, a single, high window with a sliver of darkness visible through it. In the far corner stood a tall, old-fashioned wardrobe with a tarnished mirror on its door. The room was empty. Nothing moved. Arjun frowned. Why would anyone record an empty room? He fast-forwarded. 10 minutes. 20. An hour. The scene remained unchanged. It was just a static shot of nothing. He was about to eject the tape, dismissing it as the most boring home movie in history, when he saw it. A flicker. It was so quick he almost missed it. A darting shadow in the upper left corner of the room, near the ceiling. It was there and then it wasn't, like a large moth flitting past the lens. He rewound the digital file, his cursor hovering over the timeline. He played it back at half speed. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a moth. It was a smudge of deeper blackness, a vaguely humanoid shape that seemed to contract and vanish into the corner of the room. A trick of the light. A compression artifact from the digitization? He leaned closer to the screen, his heart thumping a little faster. The room on the tape was silent, save for the faint hum of the tape itself. But then, another anomaly. A sound. Not a hum, but a whisper. It was so faint it was almost subaudible, a sibilant rush of air that seemed to weave through the audio track. He turned up his studio headphones until the silence was a roaring void. There it was again. Not words, just a sound. S-H-H-H-H-H-H-H-R. He shook his head, a nervous laugh escaping him. "You're tired, Arjun," he told himself. "You've been staring at static for 6 hours." He closed the file, ejected the tape, and went to bed, dismissing the events as the product of an overworked mind. But the next evening, he found himself drawn back to the file. He told himself he was just being thorough, checking for any salvageable content. He opened tape_07_final.move and pressed play. The room was the same. The wardrobe, the window, the faded wallpaper. He watched for 5 minutes, then 10. Nothing. Relief washed over him. It had been his imagination. He was about to close it when his eyes drifted to the wardrobe mirror. His blood ran cold. Reflected in the tarnished glass was not just the opposite wall. For a single frame, a fraction of a second, a figure was standing in the center of the room. It was tall and gaunt, its features indistinct, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It was there, and then it was gone. Arjun scrambled backwards, his office chair rolling away from the desk. He fumbled with the mouse, rewound, and advanced frame by frame. But the figure was gone. In the frame before and the frame after, the reflection showed only the empty room. It was as if the tape itself had edited in a single, horrifying image, just for him. This was no longer curiosity, it was an obsession. The tape became his secret ritual. Each viewing revealed a new, subtle violation of the original scene. On the third viewing, the whispering returned, clearer this time. It coalesced into a single, drawn-out syllable that made the hairs on his arms stand up, Ryun. It knew his name. On the fourth viewing, he noticed that the door to the room, which had always been slightly ajar, was now closed. On the fifth, a single, dark stain began to bloom on the wallpaper near the wardrobe, growing imperceptibly larger with each pass. The horror began to bleed. It started with the whispers. He'd hear them in the drone of his refrigerator, in the rush of water through the pipes in his building. Ryun, he'd spin around, heart hammering, to find his apartment empty. Then came the shadows. A flicker of movement in the periphery of his vision, a dark shape darting behind a doorway that vanished when he looked directly at it. He stopped sleeping properly. The greenish hue of the tape seemed to have stained his world. The light in his own hallway looked sickly and dim. He avoided his editing desk, the unopened file on his computer a malevolent presence. But avoidance was futile. The tape was no longer confined to the screen. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced the fixed camera angle of his dream was the same as the one on the tape. He began rearranging his furniture, trying to break the similarity between his apartment and the room on the tape, but the layout of the wardrobe and a mirror in his bedroom felt like a cruel mockery. One Tuesday evening, exhausted and frayed, he decided enough was enough. This was insanity. He was giving power to a piece of magnetic tape. He marched to his desk, grabbed the physical VHS cassette, and headed for the kitchen trash chute. But as he held it over the metal mouth of the chute, a wave of paralyzing dread washed over him. A cold certainty filled his mind. Destroying the tape would not destroy the entity. It would simply release it completely, untethering it from its prison. His hand trembled. He couldn't do it. He brought the tape back inside, placing it on his coffee table as if it were a live explosive. He poured himself a drink, his hands shaking so badly the ice cubes clattered against the glass. He needed to see it one last time. He needed to understand. It was a compulsion, a sickening pull. He sat at his desk, the whiskey burning his throat, and double-clicked the file. The room appeared on the screen. But something was different, fundamentally wrong. The camera angle had changed. It was lower now, as if the tripod had been knocked over, pointing upwards at a sharp angle. It showed the ceiling, the high window, and the upper portion of the wardrobe. And in the mirror, the reflection was no longer of the room. It was a reflection of his own apartment. He could see the back of his own head, illuminated by the glow of the monitor. He was watching himself watch the tape. A choked gasp escaped him. He tried to turn around, to look behind him, but his body was locked in place, a prisoner of terror. On the screen, in the reflection within the tape, he saw the gaunt figure. It was no longer in the center of the recorded room. It was standing directly behind his chair in the reflection. It leaned down, its indistinct face hovering just beside his reflected self's ear. The whisper that came from his headphones was no longer faint. It was clear, cold, and intimate, filling his skull. "I'm here, Arjun." The screen went black. Arjun finally wrenched himself around, stumbling out of his chair and onto the floor. The apartment was silent. Empty. He scrambled to the light switch, flooding the room with harsh fluorescent light. Nothing. He was alone. He spent the rest of the night huddled on his sofa, every creak and groan of the building sending fresh jolts of terror through him. The next day, he felt a strange, dead calm. The whispers had stopped. The shadows were gone. The oppressive dread had lifted. Had it been a fever dream? A psychotic break that had finally passed? He almost believed it. He decided to perform one final test. He would destroy the tape, the file, everything. He sat at his computer, opened the trash icon, and selected tape_07_final.move. His finger hovered over the delete key. He caught his reflection in the dark monitor screen. He looked pale, exhausted, but himself. And then he saw it. Behind his reflection, in the dim apartment, the door to his bedroom was slightly ajar. Just like in the original tape. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. He hadn't left that door open. He didn't delete the file. He didn't destroy the tape. Instead, he carefully placed the VHS cassette back in its box and stored it on a high shelf. He kept the file on an external hard drive, tucked away in a drawer. He told himself it was evidence, that he needed to keep it, to study it, to understand what had happened. But deep down, he knew the truth. The entity wasn't in the tape anymore. The ritual of viewing was over. The connection had been fully established. The line had dissolved not by breaking, but by completing itself. The horror wasn't confined to the screen because he was now living inside it. The empty room on the tape had simply been waiting for a tenant. Weeks turned into months. Arjun's life regained a semblance of normalcy. He found work, paid his rent. But he never looked into reflective surfaces for too long. He always kept all the doors in his apartment firmly shut. And sometimes, in the dead of night, he would wake up with a start, not from a nightmare, but from a faint, familiar sound that seemed to come from the other side of his bedroom door. Not a whisper this time, but the soft, steady, and unmistakable click of a recording tape being slotted into a VCR, followed by the low, mechanical hum of a play button being engaged. The recording was over. The playback had begun.